Welcome to the end of 2015! We made it! Well, I guess there's still a couple more days for the apocalypse to hit, but we made it this far. That's worth celebrating. This is going to be a very long, monstrous video, so if you're looking at that timestamp and you're like, I don't know, there are jump links in the description box. I divided them by book, because this is my 2015 book review. I wanted to make a video about all the books I read this year because I read a lot of books, and that is actually a unique thing for me. I've always loved reading, and I read a ton of books as a kid, but starting around 5th grade, I started having trouble keeping up with the assigned readings. Like, despite having a high reading level, I just couldn't read quickly. Or like, I couldn't read long things quickly. I would read the same paragraph over and over and over again because my mind would just wander. So despite loving reading and writing and English classes and doing well in all of those things, from 5th grade through all 4 years of college, it was very, very rare for me to complete an entire assigned reading. And after college, it actually didn't get any better. Some of my friends were like practically eating books after being freed from the burden of homework, but I was still struggling to finish any. It took me so long just to finish one book. And then this year, something flipped. I think it was like the combination of a new anti-anxiety medication I was taking that helped with my concentration, and starting to transition eased up a lot of the stuff that was filling my head so I could focus on reading. And I also made a 2015 New Year's resolution that anytime I found myself aimlessly scrolling Tumblr or some other part of the internet, I would stop and do something productive, like reading or listening to a podcast or watching a documentary, which probably explains why I've watched almost 100 documentaries this year. But I've also read a lot of books, 34 to be exact. And I liked a lot of them, so I thought I would do a big wrap-up review of all of them now, and hopefully you find some that you want to add to your reading list for 2016. So let's get started. Welcome to Night Vale by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor. So this is a book from the creators of the eponymous podcast. It does not follow the same story arc of the podcast, so you don't need to be caught up on the podcast, or I guess necessarily have even listened to it, although there are like fun Easter eggs, so it does help. It's got characters that use gender-neutral pronouns. It has unassumed and fluid sexualities. It talks about discrimination against people of color and against women. Plus, I was thinking it kind of reads like a series of unfortunate events in that it's both completely bizarre but also mundane. Like, both to be humorous and to have a fun style of writing, but also to like point out the bizarre things in our mundane universe. It's good. Next up, As Nature Made Him by John Colapinto. So this is the tragic story of David Raymer, a cisgender man who was raised female at Dr. John Money's instructions after a botched circumcision when he was an infant. It includes a really good critique of Dr. Money and other medical professionals and academics of the time. And it's good to know David Raymer's story to know that while parts of gender like responsibilities and roles and expressions are social constructs, part of it is also hardwired into us. So just like David was never comfortable being raised as a girl, so too are many trans people never comfortable in the gender that they were assigned at birth. His story is very sad and very messed up, but if you can handle it, that's kind of the definitive book, so I definitely recommend it. And maybe not as sad as some of the documentaries about him. Beautiful Music for Ugly Children by Kirstin Cronn-Mills. This is one of the rare few trans-masculine young adult books. I liked the main character and the kind of music themes a bit more than I do most trans YA books, but I felt like it was kind of lacking in reality for a high schooler's transition, and also lacked some of the implied practical advice that I think is kind of crucial for books like this. Next, The Family Fang by Kevin Wilson. This book is a roller coaster. It's about a dysfunctional family of performance artists, but that ends up being the least weird thing about them. And I got one of my favorite quotes of the year from it. The character Buster says towards the end, "Whatever it is, I think you'll be terrified when it happens. Don't let that stop you." Whipping Girl by Julia Serano. This is my #1 recommendation for anyone who wants a better understanding of gender identity, but more importantly, feminism. It's a perspective on misogyny from a trans woman, and it is so densely packed with hard facts and eye-opening accounts. If you are trans, you'll find a couple moments of just connecting the lines and lots of like, yes, you said it moments. And if you are not trans, I think you will have a lot of like, ah moments. So like, now. The Wicked and the Divine, volumes 1 and 2. I've read 15 issues of this comic, and honestly, I'm still a little uncertain about what's happening. But it's also so good that that doesn't even bother me. It's about 12 gods living in teenagers' bodies and also kind of the fandoms around them. It's super representative racially and sort of gender and sexuality wise, and also has some interesting critiques on like legit fandom like convention spaces and stuff, which you don't see too often. Bitch Planet Volume 1. This comic comic has taken the world by storm so much that some people, including a couple friends of mine, got tattoos based on the comic when there were only like 2 issues out. It's about a dystopian world where non-compliant women are sent to live on a prison planet, which sounds awful when you just describe it like that, but I swear it is freaking awesome. The first Man-Made Man by Pagan Kennedy. This was actually a reread. I first read it in college when I helped ease my dysphoria by reading every single book in the trans section at the NYU library. It has some faults, like referring to trans people by their old name and pronouns up until a certain point of their transition. So if you can get past that, it is a really good read. It's about Michael Dillon, the first transgender man on record to medically transition, and also features some of the earliest women to medically transition, including a brief piece with Lily Elba. It's really good for getting that perspective on trans people in the Western world in the early part of the 20th century when some of the medical procedures were first being introduced. And it's cool because it's told in narrative form, so it's kind of an easier read than just like a textbook history. Next up, Rethinking Normal by Katie Rain Hill. So I actually read this because I was told that Katie would be at GeekyCon, and I'm really glad I did because Katie is a fantastic writer and we ended up kind of becoming friends. Although that makes it a little bit awkward that I've read it because she hasn't read a full biography of all of my life's details, so that's a little weird. But I think it's an incredible autobiography from a young trans woman, which we need lots more of. And if you are someone who watches my videos, then you will probably relate to Katie. She references Star Kid in the first chapter. Yeah. One thing though, you should probably not read it until high school, maybe late high school. There's like some subject content matter that's a little more adult. And for that matter, any of you younger people watching this video, I would say like, don't read most of these books unless they're specifically young adult books. There's like a lot of sex in most of these books that I'm recommending. Okay, now I'm getting embarrassed. Next book, Some Assembly Required by Arin Andrews. So since I read Rethinking Normal, it wasn't long before I discovered the companion of sorts biography by Katie's friend Arin, a trans guy who she happened to have dated, and much of their relationship is actually documented in both books. And Arin was even making videos on YouTube for most of the period that is covered in his book. So there is just this whole weird mesh of different ways that you can see that time period in their lives from. That alone is like mind-twisting. But again, a great biography of a young trans person. It's great to have such an up-to-date and honest perspective of what high school and college is like for trans kids today. Harry Potter and the Millenials by Anthony Gierzynski and Kathryn Eddy. So this is basically a research paper, but it's written in accessible language. Basically, Gierzynski studied the Potter generation to see what long-term effects the book series had on us. And he found that on the whole, we are more liberal, more accepting, and a bunch of other stuff like that. And he has some solid evidence as to how the books might have influenced that. Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. After years of prodding, I finally read a Murakami book and I am so grateful. It totally rocked. These books do take me forever to read because there's so many tiny details and they're so surrealist that it's like, wait a second, there's a banana fish in the sky now? What? And they're not mentioning it ever again? I'm so confused. I don't know how I feel about the ending of this book, and I don't even know what I felt about the plot so much while I was reading it, but every time I opened it, I kind of felt like I was having a very beautiful LSD trip that was lovely. So I would like to read more of his books. Camp David by David Walliams. I'm not ashamed to admit that I would totally let him be my sugar daddy. If you don't know who he is, he's an English comedian and children's author, actually. But his biography is neither funny nor for children. So, it is actually pretty funny, but it does focus a lot on his depression and figuring out his sexuality. And it's all the, like, early parts of his life up until he became famous. So all of the, like, good stuff when he's on his feet and everything again, that's not in the book. It's just all of the hard, starving artist stuff. A Queer and Pleasant Danger by Kate Bornstein. I read so many gay books this year. Jeez. Not that I need to defend that, but in my defense, I was putting together a list of like all of the books that I could recommend to people when I came out, like for my resource document, and I didn't want to recommend anything I hadn't read or I hadn't read in a long time, so I had to like screen a ton of trans books. But anyways, so Kate Bornstein is one of the main like trans public figures out there. She's written a ton of stuff and pioneered a lot of good fights. And this autobiography is wild. So while she was figuring out her gender identity, she actually became an elite member of Scientology's infamous Sea Org. And then she left and she like started transitioning and she was a BDSM slave for a bit. And Yeah, what a life Kate Bornstein has had. Also, she has a I must not tell lies tattoo on the back of her hand, and it is inspired by Harry Potter, but it means so much more if you read the book. And the book is super conversational. It really feels like she's just sitting across from you telling the story over coffee. Royal Wedding by Meg Cabot. Yes, I read the new Princess Diaries book. Yes, I read all of the 10 Princess Diary books that came before it. Listen, the books were coming out as I was growing up. I wasn't just not gonna read the new book that Meg Cabot wrote specifically for the people who grew up with them and turned it into like an adult reading level for us. Although apparently what Meg Cabot means by adult reading level is Mia Thermopolis talks about sex. A lot. Little too much. It's kind of weird. But still, it was a great read. I spent most of my adolescence trying to figure out if I wanted to date Michael Moskowitz or if I wanted to be him. Still haven't really figured that one out. Parrotfish by Ellen Whitlinger. This seems to be the most popular YA book with a trans boy lead. I didn't relate to him as much as I did the protagonist in Beautiful Music for Ugly Children, but this one is definitely more realistic in the way the boy's like family and other people in his life react to his transition. I found it to be the better researched and more responsible, if less exciting, trans boy Bildungsroman. None of the Above by I.W. Gregorio. It is so cool to have a fantastic YA book with an intersex lead character. We need way more of it since intersex people, like all categories of people, are all so different. They have different personalities, they have different reactions to their conditions, they have different types of intersex conditions. This is just one small story of many more that I hope are to come because it was great, and I hope it's paving the way for more. Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. I read this one for the HPA's App Rating Library Book Club. It was really cool having a book written by someone who is obviously very familiar with fandom and the type of fan culture that I immerse myself in, but I actually more enjoyed it because it felt like being back in college. I don't think there are too many books that take place like in a college dorm setting. Or if there aren't that many that portray like my contemporary college dorm experience. So I just really enjoyed that. It felt really cool to get to read that and be in that environment, you know, in my head. Paper Towns by John Green. This was a reread in anticipation of the movie coming out. I definitely recommend it over the movie. One of the biggest points of this is dismantling the manic pixie dream girl trope, and in my opinion, the movie just served to strengthen the manic pixie dream girl. It did nothing to dismantle it. However, putting that aside, both the book and the movie are super fun. Everything else about the movie I really liked, and I love the book. Young Goofy Infinite. No House to Call My Home by Ryan Berg. This is required reading if you were working in any sort of LGBTQIA field. I was given it to read in preparation for moderating a panel with Ryan. He was a caseworker in a group home for LGBTQ youth in New York City, and he writes about some of the teenagers that he met there, not like identifying them, but, you know, anonymously. And this book is incredible because he gives faces and personalities to these hard facts that we hear about all the time. And he also, like, records the evolution of acknowledging his own privilege and really distills the huge problems that we have in the system and in this society and, like, explains why they're so hard to solve. We don't need roads by Cassine Gaines. This book is basically DVD extras of Back to the Future in book form, but I still really enjoyed it. I enjoyed getting all of the exclusive information about Eric Stoltz and the Crispin Glover conflict, but unless you are a Back to the Future superfan or a cinema studies nerd, this book might not be for you. I am both of those things, so I loved it. Landline by Rainbow Rowell. So I actually read this book because I happened to meet Rainbow Rowell the week before Back to the Future Day when all I could talk about was Back to the Future. I was probably reading We Don't Need Roads at the time, and she told me that this book of hers was all about time travel and I had to read it. It's actually about like time communication. Like there's no time travel, but there is communicating to the past. I think it might have resonated more with me if I were married, maybe, but I still love her writing so much and I liked the general concept and the characters enough that I actually couldn't put it down and read it in like a day. Career of Evil by Robert Galbraith. This is the third in the Robert Galbraith aka J.K. Rowling series. And okay, so I know that J.K. Rowling didn't initially intend for anyone to know that she was the one behind Robert Galbraith. She was outed by a lawyer's partner, it sucked. But since that is the case, I kind of feel like publishing The Casual Vacancy before this series kind of really hurt it. The Casual Vacancy is a long, dense ensemble cast of a tome that is totally not for everybody, whereas the Robert Galbraith series is a page-turning mystery saga with two simple, super lovable main characters. I genuinely love this series, J.K. Rowling or not, and I just get bummed out when people don't give it a chance because they're like, oh, I heard The Casual Vacancy sucked. That's part of that, right? I'm like, no! It's so good! Also, the sidekick's name is Robin, because J.K. Rowling is a cheeseball. Two Boys Kissing by David Levithan. This book is spectacular. It doesn't have chapters, which makes you feel like you should read the whole thing in one sitting, and like, honestly, you probably could. So it follows several contemporary teenage boys, but it's sort of narrated by like the collective spirit of older gay men who passed away during the AIDS epidemic, and I think it does an incredible job of bridging the two generations and respecting both of them. It can be really hard for my generation to understand how horrific that time period was and to kind of have blinders on for like the challenges that we currently have, and it can also be really easy for the older generation to resent us for all that, and I think this novel acknowledges that in a really beautiful way. A Separate Piece by John Knowles. I don't actually know if this was a reread or a decade later finish. It was assigned reading in 9th grade, and of course I probably didn't finish it, but since it was a class assignment, that means I was spoiled, so when I read it this year, I like knew pretty much everything that was happening, but I don't know if I had actually read it. And this is a great example of how I actually liked the books that we were assigned in class, and I didn't not read them out of lack of interest or respect for the class. I just couldn't keep up. This book is really great for people like me who equally love boarding school adventures and existential musings on your own mortality. Also, I refuse to believe that Jean and Phineas weren't in love, which is probably the real reason why I was interested in this book when I was 14. Just Add Hormones by Matt Cayley. Matt Cayley was one of the greatest contributors to documenting and advocating for trans men. He unfortunately died in 2014, which makes all accounts of his life that much more bittersweet. This book is a great guide for cis people. It includes all the basics, but it's also really good for trans masculine people who maybe don't feel as represented by the broad narrative of trans masculinity. Matt Cayley transitioned later in life. He was mostly attracted to men. He presented as uber feminine prior to transition. All of the things that you might think or be told make you not trans, which is bullshit, by the way. I really hate the front and the back cover though. It's just gross. So like if you're gonna read it, I maybe recommend the ebook so it's not embarrassing to read in public. I always had to hide it when I was on the subway. The Feminist Utopia Project, edited by Alexandra Brodsky and Rachel Cotter-Nelboff. I loved this book. I think about this book every single day. It's a collection of stories, essays, interviews, and visual art from 57 different awesome feminist people who were all prompted with, what would a feminist utopia look like? And the great thing is that these are all like activists who often have to think in terms of the negative, in terms of fighting and strife. But this was a chance to be optimistic and aspirational. And it brought out some really cool creativity from everyone. Also, the pages do this. See that rocket ship? Why don't all books do that? That's so cool! Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. So Alison Bechdel is probably best known for inventing the Bechdel test, but beyond that she is a prolific writer and graphic artist. This was the first book of hers that I read, but I cannot wait to read all of the rest of them. It's also currently a musical on Broadway, which I haven't seen yet, but I really want to see. A lot of people say that the story is darker than they thought it would be. I think this might just be because people expect graphic novels and Broadway musicals to be like bright and cheery all the time, and that's not true for either of them. I mean, yeah, it is framed by the story of her father's death, which was an alleged suicide, and a lot of it takes place at the family's funeral home, and it's all about hers and her father's sexual identities and mental health and all that fun growing up stuff. But I honestly didn't find it that dark. I just liked it. If anything, I thought it was kind of happy. Maybe it's because the cover was shiny. That always draws me in. The Amazing Book Is Not on Fire by Dan and Phil. I forgot Dan Howell and Phil Lester. Those are their names. I think this is the first YouTuber book that I've actually read all the way through, unless you count Arin from earlier or John Green. Right. Alright, well, it's the first YouTuber book from like the slew of YouTuber books this year that I've actually read. If you're a Dan and Phil fan, it's great. If you're not, I'm not sure if you would like it, but it is a beautiful book. It's like, you know, high graphics, and every page spread is like a different concept because Dan and Phil are genuinely very creative and weird guys. You get a lot of their like really fun storytelling abilities. It's a really fun book. I love the color scheme. Good for them. Next Stop Adventure by Matt Gok. Gok? No idea. This is basically a collection of all the zines that he wrote while he was riding his bike around the nation over a decade. You spend the whole book being inspired to go on your own adventures and wondering how the heck Matt is still alive. It's great. Kill Shakespeare, Volume 1. So this is a series of comics about like if all of Shakespeare's characters lived in this world where he was God. I think he's some sort of god, and they're like fighting back against him, or some of them are fighting to protect him. Juliet's a badass warrior general. That's really all you need to know. What you mean? What's a zine? Definitive guide to zine making, and it's also super inspirational in terms of coming up with style and content and stuff. The Psychic Soviet by Ian F. Svenovius. This is a book of essays on Marxism, punk rock, DIY ethics, vampires, and Seinfeld. It's one of those texts that connects everything together with everything else. A lot like in a comparative literature class when your professor says something and you're like, okay, That sounds a little conspiracist, but also really cool, and now my mind is opening to all of these other things I hadn't thought of before, but that first thing's still probably not true. Look up Deleuze and Guattari's theory of the rhizome, and then read this book. That is it! That is all of the books that I read in 2015. Let me know what you read in 2015, what you're hoping to read in 2016, what your New Year's resolution is. I guess I want you to tell me anything in the comments. I've got links to all of these books down in the description box, including indie-bound links for any of them that have them. I hope you've had as great of a 2015 as I have. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in 2016.